Good evening. Welcome to 2015 Media Talk. I have the pleasure to introducing a man who needs no introduction. A man that goes over and beyond the call of duty. A man that would risk his life for me and for you. A man that's known for doing the highest quality of work. A man that has been a fireman since the year 2000. I'm just introducing Captain Greg Favor.
And thank you again for being with us today, Captain Favor.
Thank you for having me. Sincerely, I'm not a big mic guy. I'm going to kind of keep this down here. If I could wear the Britney Spears thing, I totally would. I tend to talk with my hands a lot, so if you can't hear me, let me know, and I will hold this closer. But for right now, just kind of bear with me. Thanks a ton for coming out. This is going to be really great. Just curious, by show of hands, who is required to be here for a comms class? Okay, all right. I promise to make this worth your while, okay? Like, I can't guarantee an A, but I promise I won't make this boring, at least not all the entire time of it, okay? The other thing I want to be clear about is I wear a lot of hats in my life. I am here today as Greg Favor. I am not representing the fire department. I'm actually off work today. Like we're gonna have a great conversation, and my answers are from me. They don't represent anybody else that I work for, anybody else that I may have an interest with. So let's have a really good, great discussion today. If you guys have questions about, Ferguson, or you guys have questions about some different things, or you want to, refute something I say, by all means. College is where you're supposed to do that. So this is not me lecturing to you for an hour. Let's have a really great talk. So.
Excellent. So for our first question, can you just explain what a day in the life of a command staff officer consists exactly of?
Certainly. So my title, I am one of 7 command staff captains for the St. Louis Fire Department. We cover obviously everything within the city limits, and then we have some regional responsibilities, some technical rescue, some hazmat, stuff like that. So the 7 captains who work directly for the fire chief, we have a portfolio of different responsibilities. So over the course of a day, I may work in the Special Operations Battalion, which is our divers, our bomb guys, our hazmat guys, the guys who rappel off of the skyscrapers downtown to get window washers off. And we'll transition at lunch to some terrorism-related stuff. We'll go down to the FBI. We'll talk about threat-related incidences that have occurred in and around the region. We'll talk about what we're looking at. We'll talk about the civil unrest that's been going on in the region and what that means for emergency responders. Generally speaking, a few times a week, we'll go to a major fire. We'll go to a major incident somewhere, a rescue or a hazmat. And then kind of in the downtime between that, we write the policies that guide the fire department. So we have about 1,000 members that work for us, and it's a paramilitary organization. In order for it to function, we have to write really good, fair, equitable practices that everybody can follow. It's quite odd. Public safety went like this forever. People have this Norman Rockwell sense of what firemen and police officers do. And around 1998, we just went like this in terms of the things that we're responsible for. Social media has changed a lot of how we do our job, and we have to really craft things that allow our members to work safely and effectively while still protecting a lot of the lives and property of the people we're responsible for. So it varies greatly. There is no typical day. We generally put on different hats 4 or 5 times throughout a work day.
I did have a question regarding your writing practices. How do you build the skills to effectively write those policies, or is there a couple people that kind of collaborate on the different policies? So
definitely in an organization as large as St. Louis City Fire and with as many employees as St. Louis City Fire, there's no vacuum writing, right? Anything that I take that's going to be implemented is going to go through 5 or 6 different levels of review and hey, what do you think about this? Does this make sense? Hey, you're forgetting about this rule that was implemented in 1973. How are you getting around that? So certainly we share the burden of crafting things that are really solid for our department. In terms of being a quality writer, you just have to write. It's one of those things. It's like working out. You can't get fit if you don't go to the gym. And if you want to be a good writer, you have to write. And that is terrible It is terrible. I hate writing. I hate writing. No, I'm serious. I've been on CNN. I've been on the Huffington Post. Last week I had something in St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and I hate it. I sit in front of my desk and I just want to throw my computer across the room, but it's a discipline that you have to build up. And if you want to be good at it, if you want to be good at anything in this world, it's consistent practice. It's doing it and making mistakes and being big enough to say, wow, this is terrible. Let me move this over here and let me start again. So.
Our next question is, what steps have you taken as a spokesperson to build your relationship with different media outlets?
So there are, and I'm not just saying this because I'm in a comms environment, there are really smart people who work for the media. Like there are very insightful producers and anchors and reporters who could easily be in med school or law school, and they choose to tell the public story. So first of all, if you think you're going to get over on the majority of reporters, you're sorely mistaken. Like it will not end well, and you will be called out. The practice of building trust, the practice of being responsive when they ask you something on Twitter, which, by the way, I hope everybody here follows me on Twitter. That's @GregFavor.com. And try to get that, that follower count up. So it's being responsive when they call you on the telephone. It's communicating in a way that is receptive to their needs and their work, right? They have deadlines. And in the same breath, giving them quality stories to tell. You have to craft not what they want to hear, but you have to give them the information that they need in a way that's meaningful to them. So I tell everybody, we have a very select group of people who are allowed to speak for the fire department. There's about 4 of us out of 1,000 that are allowed to actually go out and talk to the media. And occasionally we'll have a fill-in guy, we'll have a subber, and I tell them, I'm like, it does not start when the cameras are on. Like if you're not doing the groundwork, if you're not doing the legwork for the weeks and months leading up to it, it's hard to get trust and buy-in on what you're telling them. So.
What is one step that students here today can start using to build their relationships with the media outlets?
So I think one of the biggest things is you have to realize that everything you put on the internet will be there forever. Seriously, forever. I do a lot of homeland security and terrorism work. I have federal top secret clearance. In order to get that clearance process, I have to be vetted by the FBI every set number of years, and they will come and they'll talk to my neighbors, and they may look through my trash. They are absolutely digging through my entire timeline feed. They are digging through my Facebook feed. They're on my Instagram. And that's not to say that I'm very thoughtful and diligent in how I create the trust that I want and believe people should have in me. And I see a lot of people, whether they're new firemen who are coming on the job or whether there's somebody who wants to help write for a policy proposal that we're working on, the first thing we do is we go and we look and we see what type of person is this. And what you choose to put out to the world tells a lot about what you value and who you are. So keep in mind that everything you put out there, when you go and you take a job as the night crime reporter for the Columbia Tribune, 6 months after graduation, your timeline, if you don't restart it, is going to be representative of what people can expect from you. So I think that in addition to the practice of writing and writing often and being a good storyteller, taking the time to curate the brand that you want as a respected professional is really important, and it's something that, listen, not every meme is funny, right? You don't have to post it all. So just be careful and diligent in what you choose to put out into the world.
Kind of going off of your government work, having worked in the private government and then nonprofit sectors, can you describe the skills that are crucial to these different sectors, besides writing, of course? Since we already covered writing.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think government can do a lot of good in the world. I believe this, right? I believe that government can be a really forceful thing in people's lives, especially when it is well executed and thoughtfully done. The problem is that government is cumbersome and it's very laborious. So in order to get something that may make sense through the rules and regulations process or into law, it requires a terrific amount of patience, and you have to know the system. It's like performing surgery almost, right? You can't choose to go in and start opening somebody's chest to go, oh, that's connected to that? Huh, that's interesting. Where's that go, right? And like, you should know where that leads before you start down that rabbit hole. So government's great. I really enjoy my job. I see the cameras rolling, the red lights on. I love my job. Thank you. I love my job. It can be weighty sometimes in what we have to go through to get things accomplished. When I went into the nonprofit world, when I went into the private sector world, we were much faster and much lighter. We would call ourselves high speed, low drag, and we would just do things. A little bit of side advice: if you ever have the opportunity to not have a committee, go that route. Do what you think is best, and then justify your actions afterwards. Like, get all the information and then just go do it. Committees are terrible. They hardly ever work. They're very rarely set up appropriately. If there was one thing I could change about government work, is the number of committees that we have to talk about things. The public sector allows you to just go out, the private sector just allows you to go out and do work. And the stakes are greater because they will fire you without recourse if you mess up, but they have the ability to really get a lot of meaningful things done. So if you can move quickly and be decisive, people can make a killing. And I don't mean just monetarily. People can make a killing in the private sector and public space if they are cross-functional and cross-disciplined in a lot of very meaningful skill sets.
Another question we had that kind of ties into those skill sets is like crisis management strategies, and I did kind of want to hit on that regarding the civil unrest in Ferguson in 2014. Like, how did crisis management strategies you implemented compare to like the ones that you would implement on the national government level?
So I'm not going to add much to the Ferguson discussion that hasn't already been said by people who are much more eloquent than I am. I believe, speaking as Greg Favor, that there was a large failure in how government chose to discuss the events, both initially, and when I say initially, I'm talking about the first 24, 48 hours, and then as the weeks progressed in August. Crisis plans are great in theory. The problem is that unless you push up against something, you don't know how robust it is. And there are a lot of organizations, not just in government, not just in public safety, that say, if X happens, we will do Y, because it makes sense. The problem is that Y doesn't always present itself based on what you think X is going to be. So I don't know that there is a perfect crisis management plan that could have been implemented post-Ferguson. I don't know that there is something. There's so many underlying factors, and there's so many things that have been simmering in the debate around what Ferguson represented, that I don't know that there's something that could actually articulate how best to approach this from a media perspective. But I know that there was very little trust built in with some of the organizations that were represented. And the other problem was that social media, like I said, government is laborious. It takes a long time for government to catch up to what the actual world looks like. A lot of the people that were crafting messages failed to appreciate how quickly social media was moving past their talking points. And if you don't have the ability to keep up and not refute everything, I mean, if somebody has 200 followers on Twitter and they post some ridiculous stuff, you don't have to respond to everything. But when there is a tidal wave of misinformation or disinformation or information that is shaded in a way that is specifically out there to support a particular narrative and it's not true, you need to have the capacity to push back against that. That was absent in Ferguson, and it cost the entire process dearly. And I think it would be really interesting, and I would love to, if anybody would like to talk about this afterwards, what I think is really interesting is how we talk about media in Ferguson. I'm good friends with a lot of reporters, and I saw them up there in the nights following the initial shooting. I know them because they wear press credentials, right? I know them because they have their Post-Dispatch lanyard on, and they have their KMOV, or they have their CNN lanyard on. They're what I would consider the media, and I'm not that old. I'm 34 years old. They are what I would consider the media. When you have somebody who is at the skirmish line with police, and they are recording with their iPhone, and they have a cord that's running back into a power pack, and they run a blog with 1,000 people who are watching this live stream, and they call themselves the new media, or Mikey's new media outlet 2.0. Is Mikey really the media? I don't know. I don't think he is. I don't think of him as like a mainstay media organization, but I think that is my antiquated feeling. And I don't want to be the guy who points to one person and says, no, you're not media. You have to walk away, because that's a really slippery slope. It's a really dangerous precedent to set. Conversely, it is also really dangerous to have people who, under the guise of media, moving into unsafe positions, whether it's unsafe for the protesters, or it's unsafe for the police officers who are holding the line, or it's unsafe for the business community around them. There are people who said, "I'm media," and then would further agitate the surrounding areas that they were influencing. So I don't know what the answer is. You are all smart communications professionals who, right, within 5-7 years are going to be running newsrooms. I would be curious to know what you guys think about this, but I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's a really serious problem, because we're going to continue to see these pop-up media conglomerates. I'm on open assignment for the Huffington Post. No, if you get a good enough video, the Huffington Post is going to link to your YouTube channel. That's different than being sent there by the Huffington Post to cover X. So I think it's a really interesting conundrum, and it has some potential to be dangerous. So, just kind of kick it around. What is a journalist? What is the media actually look like, and who is willing to step up and be the one to censor media? So, yeah, long answer, but I apologize. I kind of went off on something that I've been thinking about for the last year, and I've talked to reporters on it. I've talked to people who run blogs. And I've talked to people who work for NPR, and nobody has a really good sense of this. That's insufficient. Just because we don't know doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it and think about it and come up with an answer.
Going along with things that are going around here, with the new opening of the IKEA location, what strategies did you work in place with the opening of that?
Yeah, IKEA was a really odd beast. It's a huge store, and I had never been to one beforehand, and it's actually really cool. I like IKEA. They are so good from a corporate side that they told us exactly what to expect. That's really helpful. Very often in public safety, we don't have that luxury. You're talking about why somebody died, or it's very acute in public safety. You don't have this lead up time. So IKEA was great, because they said, you're going to get questions about traffic. You're going to get questions about emergency responses in the area with increased traffic. You're going to get questions about, and they gave us 5 or 6 questions to be prepared for, and I answered every one of them within the 2 weeks in the lead up that was heading up to it. It's really nice when you have the time to prepare. When I can sit and think about some nice talking points and have some time to sit with the official department position and find a way to craft that in a way that makes sense to people, it's fantastic. So of all the things that I've done, IKEA was, I would say, certainly in the top half in terms of size and scope, one of the easiest by far. So when you can work with great partners in the space who do this for a living, it makes our job much easier.
Thinking about some of the problems that you face, or the dilemmas that you have to go to, what type of ethical dilemmas do you face in your job?
So we often balance an individual or a family's right to privacy with the public need to know. I have heard, I've gone home to, South City, and I'll talk to people in the parish that I grew up in, and they'll say, "Oh, Greg, I saw you on the news. You never smile." And that's generally because I'm talking about either someone's house is burnt down, or a child has been struck and killed, or it is generally not the joyful happy time hour when Greg's on TV. We don't, firemen go to the worst of everybody's day. We generally don't show up when everything's perfect. So you're often balancing what is obviously a big story in a community or in the city or in the region as a whole with families' right to have some privacy. And oftentimes when we are speaking in the first 90 minutes, 3 hours of an incident, oftentimes not everybody in the family has been made aware of a death. So we're constantly, everybody wants the shot, right? All the media organizations want the camera here and me here so that they can get the building burning behind me, right? And we have somebody trapped on the second floor, or the building's already collapsed and somebody's still inside, and they're definitely dead, and we're not going to be able to remove them from that scene for another 2 hours or so. And while I get that that's great TV, you can tell what 100 block I'm on, or you can see the address signs on the two houses on both sides, and somebody's watching the 6 o'clock news and they realize that that's Uncle Joe's house. So we're often kind of balancing the right to privacy with the larger need to know, and it's very trying because you want to give the dead the respect that they deserve. You want to give the families the respect they deserve. There are a lot of things that happen in the city that we need people to know about and either take action to avoid or be part of the mitigation efforts if we're talking about hazmat or something like that. So it's a really delicate balance. And then the other thing is we're not always read in on everything. So Garen Mosby, who's actually the other PIO who many of you may have seen on TV, he's an African American. I'm significantly more attractive, but he's very good at his job, I should say. Oftentimes when we are discussing something on the scene, if I'm operational, I'm working with the fire chief or the battalion chiefs or the deputy chiefs to actually fix the problem. There are things that we won't tell Garen because we know that he has to go do the 6 o'clock live shot. Hey, I'm standing in front of downtown where we've just, and there are things that we don't tell him intentionally because it would make his job more difficult to be in front of the camera and say or dance around or tap around. And I'm sure it's happened to me too, right? I'll come back after a live shot and somebody will go, "Hey, just so you know, we think both occupants are deceased," right? Chances are they probably knew that before I ever went and did the live shot. But when I get the question, I can honestly and truthfully say, at this time, we're executing all rescue strategies that we have, and we hope for a positive outcome. I'm not lying to the media. I can speak from the heart. I can say it truthfully. So there's that delicate balance internally too of what we know, when we know, and when we tell each other.
That's kind of going off of those crisis strategies and the ethical dilemmas going into there. I know we kind of hit earlier how a crisis strategy doesn't always play out exactly how you plan it. X doesn't equal Y in most cases. I wanted to kind of go back and ask again, how important then are contingency plans in adjacentness to having a preemptive crisis management strategy?
They're great on paper. They're great for board of directors and people that want to feel like they have some blanket of security. Crisis management plans are like playing chess, where you think about all of the moves that you could potentially make or your adversary could potentially make, and then you would counter by doing this. The problem is that life is not like chess. In chess, there's only a set number of, my opponent only gets to move once, right? And if he moves his rook, he can only go this direction or this direction. There's a defined battle space, if you will, when we're talking about chess. Crises are so much more complex and they're so much larger that it's very difficult to account for not only the nuances of what's going to happen, but all of the players involved. So, listen, they're great to have. It's important to kind of think through these things. When something happens, we do not reach for these plans as a way of this is what we're going to do. We might use them as a foundation, but we move as the tide is moving us, and we find the best way back to shore.
With your experience as a spokesperson, what strategies do you utilize to make sure your message is clear and understood?
So my two heroes in life, right? The two pictures that I have up in my study, besides pictures of my wife, pictures of my parents. I have a picture of Robert Kennedy, and I have a picture of Carl Sagan, because both of these men had a unbelievable ability to connect with any audience that they walked into. So Robert Kennedy, for those of you who don't know, was John F. Kennedy's, the president's younger brother. He was the attorney general. He was a brilliant man, right? Went to the best schools in the world, grew up with millions of dollars. His family had it all. And when Bobby Kennedy ran for president, he went around this country, and he would speak to the migrant worker in California. He would speak to the Indiana farmer. He would speak to the African-American shoeshine man in Memphis, and he would be able to carry on a conversation, and not in like a condescending way, like not in a way that he was just trying to score some votes. Like, he had the ability to speak to anybody that he was in front of and find what was meaningful to them and talk to them about that. That's a really powerful gift. And if you want to talk about like what is great oratory, if you want to talk about what is one of the greatest speeches in American history, go on YouTube after this and look up Robert Kennedy's speech on the night that Martin Luther King was killed. He was in Indianapolis, and on the flight out there, his staff told him that Martin Luther King had been shot by a white man in Memphis. And you have to remember where this is, right? This is the height of the Civil War, the height of the civil rights struggle in the 60s. All of his staff, some of the best minds, young, liberal minds, were saying, don't go out there. Don't go to this largely African-American neighborhood and make this announcement. We can't guarantee your safety. He touches down in Indianapolis. The police chief says, sir, please don't go. And he says, no. If you want to be a leader, you lead when times are tough. And he goes out there with no speech, no notes, and he gives probably the most powerful 4-minute speech in American history. And it is unprecedented. He speaks to these people on a level that they can connect with the feelings and the emotions that they are having. And while other major cities in the United States rioted that night, Indianapolis was peaceful, and it was largely in part to what Robert said. If you've never heard it, it will make the hair stand up on your arm if you have any sense of like, wow, this is how you reach people. Carl Sagan was the same way. He had the ability to take really complex mathematical, scientific information and bring it to the everyday man. He was able to bring it down in a way that didn't overwhelm people. When we talk about complex events in the city, when we talk about stuff in our region and how it affects the fire department, or how it affects your public safety, how it affects your drive up and down 40, we want to do it in such a way that it's not just being heard by the mayor and his staff, or it's not being heard by the president of MoDOT who wants to make sure we're hitting the right talking points on highway accidents, right? We want everybody to have a sense of what's going on around them and be able to connect to that. So I think that's probably the preeminent skill in terms of when we're talking about complex crisis issues, is the ability to bring it down to anybody who's in earshot, because they're all your audience. It's a fool's errand to think that you aren't speaking to everyone when the mic kicks on or you're in studio or something like that.
Kind of hitting off of bringing that message down to where it can be easily understood, how do you work to also tie that into the key message of the organization that you're crafting that message for?
So I'd say the biggest part of that, and I'll just touch on it briefly, is understanding where your audience is, right? So you look at the socioeconomic buildup of St. Louis, right? St. Louis City, and it is, we have large pockets of poor socioeconomic class. And we were doing all of these things for fire safety. Like, we were on Twitter and we were on Facebook, and we were doing the spots on Channel 5 at the 5 o'clock news about change your clocks, change your batteries. And we noticed that even after years and years and years of doing this, we were still in the large pockets of North St. Louis City, which is largely, if not completely African American, there were entire neighborhoods without smoke detectors. Because while we thought we were running around doing all of these things, and we're like, oh yeah, we're talking about all this stuff, and this is great. We're gonna, that it was hitting the wrong audience. We did not fully value the totality of our audience, and so we needed to find ways to get into the community that were in most need of this. The people who are working in lower income neighborhoods generally aren't home at 5 o'clock to watch the news, right? They're either working a second job, or they're in public transit, or they're getting something set up for the next day. That's a large audience that we're hitting. So in order to minimize that, we had to find different inroads, and we started going to the churches. If anybody's familiar with North St. Louis, if you want to find the bedrock of where good things are happening in North City, go to the churches. I mean, I worked up there 6 years at Union and Natural Bridge, another 3 years covering Midtown and Walnut Park area. You want to find the people that are making a difference in their community, go to the churches in North St. Louis. And that's where we started heading. And we got together with the clergy, we got together with the ministers and the bishops who were up there. And all of a sudden, over the course of 2 or 3 years, we started seeing a significant decline in fire-related deaths because more people in a community that was otherwise not getting the message had proper smoke detectors, and they were putting their space heaters the right distance, and they were doing all of the things that we hoped they were doing anyway, but we had to find a way to really get into their neighborhood and speak to them. Yeah.
Do you think it's important to kind of experiment and see some different methods of getting the message out there? Because going to the churches is pretty non-traditional, and with our ever-changing world of social media as well, it can be difficult to get the message out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we use everything, and if you look at other, not just St. Louis Fire, if you look at really at good other government organizations, they have everything. They're posting stuff on Instagram. They got, they have Twitter accounts. They have verified Twitter accounts. I mean, you have to run the gamut. And the good news is a lot of your content doesn't have to be changed. You just have to move it across different platforms. And you have to inundate. If it's important enough for people, especially at the public safety level, which is generally life-saving, if it's important enough for people to hear, you should be willing to throw it as many walls as you can hit.
I did want to ask you about your work with the Mission Continues, the nonprofit organization. Can you just describe your work for them?
So, has anybody heard of the Mission Continues? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so obviously our comms plan locally did not work all that well. So the Mission Continues is a really impactful nonprofit. They help post 9/11 veterans find purpose when they transition out of the military. It was started by Eric Greitens, who's a local boy here from St. Louis. He was a Navy SEAL, did several combat tours, came home and wanted to continue to serve. He is also, incidentally, a candidate for Missouri's governor right now. So they were experiencing a tremendous amount of growth. I joined as the chief of staff for the organization, so I worked as Eric's chief of staff for a few years. And over that time, we took $17,000 in seed money and created an organization that is now worth $13 million. And that's over about 5 years we were able to do that. They have offices in 7 cities now, and they've touched the lives of 250,000 veterans and or other like their immediate kind of circle of trust. But the best part about working there was so I walked in one day and I had a piece of paper, something that I had written, an op-ed. And I handed it to my boss, and he looked at it, and he said, "No, this is not good. Go make this great." And as I started to take it, I was tired. It was late in the day. It was like 7:30 at night. I hadn't been home yet, and I very kind of nonchalantly took the paper back, and I said, "Okay, I'll try." And he looked at me and he goes, "Don't try, make it better. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. So I come in to work the next day, and there's a framed Post-it note. I don't know who frames a Post-it note. I don't know where you got the frame from. But sitting on my desk, there's a framed Post-it note, and it says, man, it took me right back there, because I remember picking it up and actually reading it and going, what have I gotten myself into? It says that perfection is the expectation, and excellence will be tolerated. And it was, I still have it. I mean, I have it today. I have it in my office right now. And that's the way that the organization worked. That's the way the boss worked. That's the way I was expected to work. And we worked all the way through the organization to make sure that that was the code that we lived by. And that's how we went from $17,000 to a $10 million plus organization so quickly. That's why Goldman Sachs came in with $6 million to support. That's why we were testifying before Congress. That's why we were at the White House. That's why we were, because every day that we showed up, you were expected to not just clock in, you had to show up. And if you didn't show up, and we did this often, like nonprofit, like, oh, I'm gonna change the world to nonprofit. We worked. And if you didn't work, you left the organization. There was no two ways about it. If you want to be impactful, if you want to do great work, you have to be willing to show up. There are plenty of people out there who are willing to just collect a paycheck. If you want to be meaningful, if you want to have an impact, show up and do the work.
Are there any hobbies you have that help or carry over into your field of work?
So I read a lot. I make time to read, and I hate ebooks. I don't like Kindles. I don't want to do it on my iPad. I actually sit quietly and read, and I think that's really helpful because I see great writers and I find ways to be more like them. If you want to be stronger in the weight room, you find mentors to help you get that way. If you want to be a better football player, you find coaches. Part of my job and part of my ability is telling stories and getting people to believe a certain thing. I want their buy-in, and I do that by being more convincing and knowing how to reach people. So reading is certainly up there, and I do it very purposefully. I read things not because they're on the bestseller list, but because I need to read something in order to deepen that. The other thing that I do is, man, this sounds like Ron Burgundy. I work out a lot. You know, oh, Mrs. Corningstone. I don't know if you heard. I just did 1,000. But right, you didn't think you were going to Ron Burgundy quote today, did you? So no, it really is. Like there's somebody told me one time that you make the body scream to quiet the mind. When I really have a problem, I will go and I'll do sprints in Forest Park, or I'll go downstairs. I have a squat cage. And I will turn on the loudest music that I can stand. It's generally when my wife is not home. And I will go down there and I will turn on the lights and I will lift heavy weights to the point where all of my mental capacity is focused on doing the exercise right. Otherwise, I will crush myself and people will find me lifeless in my basement. And when I get to that point, when I have no other bandwidth to devote to the problem that's in front of me, it's amazing the clarity of thought that I have around some serious problems. So when I have something that's really ticking hard, I find a way to quiet everything else, shut down everything else, and it's almost like this light comes on and I see a pathway. So that works for me.
Excellent. At this point, we're going to have James kind of go through and take some audience questions.
Hi. I just had a question. I know you talked about leadership, and I was wondering, what have you found to be the most successful style of leadership and that you use when delegating to maybe your team or all of the different positions that you've held?
So whether it's in public safety or whether it's in nonprofit, people have to believe that you are willing to do the work. I can tell grown men to go into dangerous situations because I've been there, right? I have a buy-in from the guys that I work with, and they believe They understand that I know what I'm asking them to do and what the dangers are involved. I can ask our comms team at the Michigan Continues on the night before congressional testimony to stay till 1:30 because I'm there with them, right? If you want to be a leader, you have to be willing to share in the sacrifice. You have to be willing to shoulder your share, and sometimes more as a leader, your share of the responsibility. Without that, it falls on deaf ears and you are a puppet. If people can't believe that you have their best interest at heart or that you are all moving towards a common goal, your team will fall apart around you. You look at some of the best generals, right, and they lead from the front. Nobody wants somebody who's like, hey guys, stay and work on that press release tonight. I'm out, it's 5 o'clock, right? You have to be in the trenches with your guys or gals, and to do otherwise is a disservice to them.
You talked about like shutting off mind and body with issues serious like such as Ferguson. Was there even a time for you to shut down? Where did you draw the line? When to stop and when to keep going?
Yeah, great question, man. Ferguson was crazy. I mean, I've worked in some of the most dangerous parts of St. Louis. I've worked in some of the busiest fire battalions. I've been trapped in fires. I've been shot at. I like to think that I have a pretty high threshold for ridiculousness going on around me. And Ferguson was as legit as anything that I've been a part of, especially in some of the first nights of the first week. It was very much a hang-on type of situation. I mean, we were looking to protect guys, our responders, as best we could, because we had firemen and medics from the city up in the county. And as we started talking about how we were going to talk about this as a department, what we were going to put on our Facebook page, what we were going to tell our members, there is not that beautiful, like, okay, well, let's call a meeting and let's go around the room and talk about what everybody's like. It was like, hey, what are we saying? We got to get this thing out, and it really helps to have a good team who trusts each other there, and you can say, like, hey, I just typed this up. I'm going to put this on the department Facebook page. Does this look right? And they look and they're like, no, this is terrible. This whole last sentence has to go. This is what it means to me, and I'm looking at this from X, Y, and Z. Here's the rewrite. And that's what it was for those first couple weeks in Ferguson. I mean, it was like third grade, notes being passed back and forth and scribbled on, and like 18 rewrites on something that's 3 sentences to make sure that we crafted the right piece of the department voice. So that's not possible if you don't do that groundwork and that legwork beforehand. You wouldn't ask somebody to go to the playoffs having not played the season together, right? It doesn't work that way. You have to have cohesion long before the stressful situation takes effect.
You mentioned earlier about how you have to put on a lot of different hats and do a lot of different things. Is that stressful, like more stressful than just doing one job, or or is it, I guess, not fun, but is it more like exciting and interesting, and is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Like when people ask how do you do, this diverse palette of what you've done for the last 15 years, like I want to touch everything, and that drives my wife crazy a lot of times because I'm like, hey, I'm going to apply for this fellowship, and then I'm going to go do this, and then I'm going to go, and she's like, would you just find something and stick with it? But I'm not that way. Like I want to see it, and I want to touch it, and I want to go there, and I want to do the thing, and I want to meet the guy, and that requires a lot of work. I mean, not to make it sound like I go to bed at 11:30 most nights, and I wake up at 5 a.m. most days. Like that's just how it works. And I may not do this forever, but I'm doing it right now, and I'm going to continue to keep going until somebody tells me no. Because when I push on things, doors generally open. And if I want it bad enough, I'll back up and I'll take a running start at the door. And it's worked really well so far, and it's moved me into experiences that I have no right as a middle-class kid from South City that I have no right to be a part of. It's ridiculous, and it's a lot of fun, and it requires hard work, but I am crafting a life of my own design as opposed to being dictated to. And every time I think, oh, I don't want to set my alarm tomorrow, it's really early, I don't want to get up, I think, imagine if you had a job where you had to be somewhere at X or you would be fired. I don't like my fate being in the hands of other people. I like diversifying my portfolio in such a way that I decide what I want to pursue, that I decide what's next. And it's opened a lot of doors, and it's a lot of fun.
So moving back into the Ferguson crisis, can you talk a little bit, because I know that for me, I was sitting with the news on, but I was also looking through social media more for like the man on the street kind of perspective, for the people that were there and seeing it. I didn't really realize that independent agencies were posting things on their own social media. So can you talk a little bit about who was running the show? Was there one person speaking for all of you guys, or were each individual government agency kind of operating on their own? And all together, how do you think it could have been done differently so that everyone was kind of giving out the same message and giving out the same information so that things were running a little bit smoother?
Yeah, so that's actually an area that I'm not sure I can appropriately answer because it is largely law enforcement based, and I was not in some of those comms meetings specifically for law enforcement. I do know that when I was up there mostly operational, mostly tactical, and working with teams that were actually going out, less than the media side of things. But I will say that when I saw groups getting together to talk for the 2 a.m. briefing, and especially when the national media came in, it was terrifically divided, and there was very little, at least initially, very little coordination about what was going to be released, when it was released, how it was going to be released, and that is unfortunate. And I don't think that was necessarily the best course of action to take. You saw some cohesion later on down the line. The other thing that I felt was lacking, not just from a comm standpoint, but if you want to talk about what's really powerful with connecting with an audience, it's empathy. And empathy is different from sympathy. Like, let's be very clear about the terms that we're discussing here. Empathy is different from sympathy. You can be empathetic and not sympathize. Just because something doesn't make sense to you doesn't mean that it isn't true in somebody's heart, for the person next to you. And it's a very powerful thing. And it's really underappreciated in our culture. And when we talk about especially controversial subjects like Mizzou yesterday or Ferguson, it's empathy is a really powerful thing. And if anybody's taking notes, there's a great book out there called The Empathic Civilization. It talks about how to grow empathy in your own lives and what it means. Really powerful book, really really well done. But I think there was a real lack of empathy when government was speaking about what was going on, and I think that furthered a lot of the issues that we saw, at least initially. This is my own, again, I'm speaking from my own perspective, but I tend to, when people speak, I listen, and I listen like would I allow a candidate or a chief or my friend to say this, and there was a lot there that I thought could have been done better.
Looking at things like the Michael Brown shooting and then like Mizzou and just kind of all these different racial issues, what do you think is causing them to erupt? And I probably shouldn't use the word cause because that's not really what I'm looking for, but obviously Ferguson turned out a little bit different than some of these other ones. And what have you noticed the difference to be between like that situation and then others that may have turned out more smoothly?
Well, that's all the time we have. Thanks for coming out. This was fantastic. Jesus, wow. Yeah. So, I think, man, I tell you what, I don't know that I can do that question the right amount of justice. There is a tremendous amount of issues that are intertwined, and it's almost like it's almost like when people feel sad. Like feeling sad is generally not something that is isolated to one thing, right? Like you may have a disappointment in your day, but when you are like deep down, gloomy, I want to go home and crawl into a Snuggie and go to bed sad, that is generally a byproduct of a lot of different things that have gone wrong in your day, right? Like how you ate or what the weather was like or a lot of the issues that we are seeing are a culmination of a lot of different real and perceived injustices that exist in the world, and they've existed for some time, and they are not just racially based. They're socioeconomic. There's a large, diverse spectrum of what this actually looks like and why people feel the way that they do. And again, this is where that empathy piece comes into play. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true globally. It means it's true to them, and that's enough. Like that's enough that we should address it when it is true to them. So I think bringing this to a comms and like what does a successful resolution look like, I think that the organizations that are able to be human about the issues that people bring, and I'm talking mostly about government, when people can, as government agencies, speak to other people as people and not give a sterilized, canned, totally, I don't want to say irreverent, but just a complete lack of feeling statement out. When people can start to connect and bridge a divide. I mean, look what Captain Ron Johnson did, right? Like, he went out and he walked with the people. And he went out and he talked in the churches. And he went out and he said, tell me what you're feeling. It doesn't mean that Ron Johnson, a sworn police officer for 20 plus years, agreed with everything that the protesters were saying, but they felt like they had an outlet. They felt that they had a voice. And Ron didn't do everything, he didn't do everything perfect. I don't think anybody in this world could do everything perfect in that situation, but he treated the individuals around him like people and spoke to them like people. And that carries a tremendous amount of impact, and it builds that trust that you need in order to talk about difficult things. So if that's the start of what could obviously be a semester-long course in crisis management.
So I'm going to give you hopefully an easier question to answer than that one.
Right. I don't think you can give a harder one, so let's shoot.
So you mentioned that you make time to read every day. I'm assuming every day or something like that. But how do you deal with like time management and making the time to do things like that with the demands of work and all the other things that you do?
So it's a lot of trial and error. One of my favorite quotes is that mastery lies upon a mountaintop of mistakes. It's a great quote, and I don't have this all figured out, and I tweak my schedule often. I find either new and innovative things. Like, I love The Economist. You guys want to have a sense of what's going on in the world? Get the student version of The Economist. It'll come every Saturday. You have a week to read it. It's going to touch on everything from policing in America to what's going on with ISIS to why Bitcoins are going to change the future of finance. Like, they're short, little articles. You can pick them up and read 2 over breakfast, and you'll be infinitely smarter just moving forward in the world. But The Economist has a little app that's it's called the Espresso app. And most mornings, while I brew a cup of coffee and I sit with my phone, I don't like reading on my phone, but I sit with my phone and I read. It takes 7 minutes to flip through what I should know that day in relation to national policies, foreign policy, domestic stuff. It's terrific. I find things, Reddit is actually really valuable. Reddit can be pretty ridiculous. If you create an account and choose the subreddits that you want to follow, and it's a great way to kind of crowdsource really good information across multiple platforms. So you make time for it. Like everything else that I do, it's a discipline. If it is important enough for me to do in my life, I want to find a way to do it really well. Whether I'm working out, whether I'm being a captain, whether I'm, whether it's my marriage, like I find a way to craft ideas to do it really well. And I go with those until I can reevaluate them and say, this is great, except I need to add more time here or take time here or add this. So it's a lot of trial and error, and you just have to find out what works for you and what's important to you. These are great questions, by the way. Thank you. These are really good.
Going back to your leadership role, how do you, with those that follow you, how do you get them not to just see your vision and your passion, but to join you in that, and for them to work passionately as well in achieving your goals?
So I have some friends who are just starting to get promoted into the rank of captain, and we'll talk about some things, and I'll say, what do you do if this happens? And they'll go, well, I will touch my collar where we carry our rank, and they'll go, I'll touch my collar and go, because I said so. And there are times when that is required. Those times are very few and far between. This goes back to the community sense of buy-in and trust. How does a head football coach, and I'm not the head coach of the team, but let's say I'm the special teams coordinator, like how great organizations lead from the top down, and they know the fire chief is behind it. Fire chief empowers the people that are directly underneath him. It's our job to go out and create a vision, create a narrative around what we want to accomplish and what this means for you as a fireman or you as a paramedic, what your actions here will translate into. Creating a vision is a really tough thing to do. It's a really powerful thing to do. If you can do it well, you can motivate an army, all right? But it's a really tough thing to be able to dial in, and it requires good leadership at various levels. So we work on creating a vision. We work on creating a story around what do we want to be? What do we want to be known for? And firemen are kind of universally respected. It's one of the benefits that makes comms in my job pretty easy is people like firemen. We generally show up and help people. So what firemen do is they look for validation from other firemen. Like we like to say that the only people cooler than us at a party is a fighter pilot, right? Like and so we like to, when we talk about creating a narrative, we talk about crafting something that these guys can get behind and be seen as X, Y, and Z to the firemen in Detroit or Kansas City, or this is what we want to be known as. So you create a vision, you find out what's important, and you move forward from there.
My question's probably going to be pretty simple. Just like you just seems like such a driven man, and I was just curious, like you've been a firefighter for like 15 years. Why a firefighter to start off with that kind of led to all these amazing paths that led to you just meeting very influential people? So like, why? I guess my question is like, why a firefighter?
Service is really important. Like, and not to get really high level stuff here, but service is important to a republic. You look at the great republics over the course of history, and service is valuable, right? I know, what's the school motto here? I know service is on the end there. You guys go here. What is it? Okay, so on the crest out there, it was something to the effect of like education for service or the tools for service or something like that. You don't have to serve in uniform. You don't have to serve with a breast badge on. But for me, I knew that I am not an office guy. I don't like being in the office. I try to avoid meetings. I've been known to pick up and leave if a cool call comes in on the radio. I'm like, I gotta go. Like I like being out. I didn't want a 9-to-5 job, and so it made a lot of sense to me. Also, the community that I grew up in had a lot of people in the community that were firemen, and they were well respected in the community. It seemed like a very noble path and a very noble course of action. So it just made a lot of sense to kind of pursue that. The other stuff has, like I said, has opened up because when somebody asks if you can do something, you say yes. And if it turns out that you can't, well, then you know more about it than when you started. But the things that I choose to put on my plate, I'm going to knock out of the park, or at least I'm going to take a swing big enough to knock them out of the park. And to be clear, like you guys it's been very flattering. Your intro was very nice. Like I want everybody to know that I have made a ton of mistakes in my life. Like I emailed the CEO of Boeing, not the CEO here in St. Louis, like the big Boeing Chicago. I emailed him to thank him for something that Boeing had done for the Michigan Continues, and I misspelled Boeing. And it was like this thing went out to like 8 people that were CC'd on there, and the pit in my stomach that day of like I could have dug a hole into the carpet and crawled underneath my desk. So I want to be very clear, like you see what is public and what is out there for people to see. I live atop a mountain of mistakes. And I see we're running just a minute over on time. I will say this, that if you are in this room, whether you are here because you had to be here for a comms class or you just decided that this might be interesting and this guy might have something to say, if you are in this room, you're going to be okay. If you are on this campus and you can afford to go to school here, you have a scholarship or somebody's helping you, if you can come to things like this and hear ideas and formulate a question or at least leave thinking about something that you didn't have in your brain before you got here, you're going to be okay. And you may not make $300,000 a year, but you are not going to be starving. Not by, at least, not by society's design. So just like go out and be excellent. Go out and choose the 5 or 6 things that are most important to you and then swing for the fences and, just keep going because when you knock, the world will yield. I guarantee it. It has time and time again, and I'm really not that smart. Like I just refuse to quit, and I just don't stop, and I want to do everything. So just go out and find out what's important, and just be great.
Well, all right. We thank you guys. We thank you guys for coming to 2015 Media Talk. I want to thank Mr. Greg Faber, our interviewers, Ms. Staggenboard, and thank you guys for coming.
Thanks, everybody. It was a great time.